All right, so first thing we're going to talk about is thinking and problem solving. Some of this stuff I'm just going to go through very quickly because a lot of this stuff is very straightforward. All right, so how do we think? Okay, most of what we think about is for classification purposes. All right, how do we classify things? We put things into what are called concepts, mental concepts, which are just groupings of things that are similar. All right, we can tie a concept. A concept is essentially the same thing as a schema. Okay, so how, concept of ball, car, whatever. All right, within a concept or within a schema, there is generally, whatever the concept is, there's whatever we picture as being like the most indicative of that concept, the thing that fits the best with that concept, what is called a prototype. A prototype is something that has all of the basic characteristics of a concept. Like when we think of a bird, we probably think of a robin or an eagle or something like that, but not a penguin, all right? Because penguins are not really prototypical of birds. Okay, so we try to fit, and when we learn something new about a prototype or about a concept, we try to fit it with that prototype. If it fits, then we're assimilating. If it doesn't fit, then we have to accommodate. Okay, creative thinking. Creativity is our ability to produce novel ideas. Okay, convergent thinking is a type of thinking that sort of a lot of times gets in the way of creativity. All right, convergent thinking is basically thinking inside of the box, and when we essentially convergent thinking is like a multiple choice problem. All right, you're given multiple different options, and then you have to narrow it down to one. We could say it's kind of the anti-creativity. You're fine. Divergent thinking is more creative thinking. All right, divergent thinking is when you get an idea, and we just say, all right, just brainstorm. Okay, it'd be thinking outside of the box, but if given a problem or whatnot, and then people come back with multiple different solutions to it. So divergent is thinking outwardly, convergent is thinking inwardly. All right, how do we solve problems? A couple different ways that we solve problems. Algorithms. An algorithm is a step-by-step procedure for solving a problem that if we do it correctly, we will get the right answer each time. It's usually a formula. An example of an algorithm is the quadratic equation. All right? If you do it right, you're going to get the right answer, but they can be impractical because they are very time-consuming. Like if you were trying to figure out a locker combination and you just decided to start at 0, 0, 0 and then go all the way through them, eventually you're going to get the right locker combination, but it might take a really long time to get there. So what we use most often is a rule of thumb. Okay, what is called a heuristic. All right, a heuristic is sort of a mental shortcut that is often times correct, all right, but not always. Okay, like the example I have on there, if a company says, okay, if a resume has spelling errors on it, we automatically throw it away. Okay, that's probably going to work most of the time because you don't want somebody working for you who doesn't know, who isn't, diligent and that sort of stuff. But maybe they're dyslexic, but they're like incredibly creative. All right, so most of the time, a rule of thumb is going to work. Some of the time it is not, and we'll talk about where these can become problematic. All right. Other ways that we problem solve. All right. Insight, which is just the aha moment. You're trying to figure out something, can't figure it out. A lot of times the best thing to do is just walk away from the problem. And then sometimes the answer to it will just come to you. Name you need to associate with insight learning is Wolfgang Kohler. All right, did stuff with chimpanzees. What was the order that I have this in? There should be another slide in here somewhere, I feel like. But all right, so we'll just go through over these terms. Confirmation bias, all right? Something that can get in the way of us critically thinking. All right? Confirmation bias is when we have a belief about something and we only look for information that confirms what we believe, right? And then we ignore stuff that goes against it. Best, easiest example of this would be only watching certain news networks. Okay, if you are far right wing, all right, then maybe Fox, maybe OAN. If you're far left wing, maybe like the Young Turks or MSNBC or anything like that. All right, because the news networks generally just give information that goes along, that fits into the belief system of the people that are watching it. And they tune in because they want to hear information that goes along with what they already believe. All right, stereotypes, example of this. Okay, if you have a stereotype in your mind and you see somebody that fits into that stereotype, you think, all right, well, that stereotype is right because I saw one person that fit it. All right, some of the other things that get in the way of us being able to solve problems. Okay, fixation. Fixation is when we are trying to go about solving a problem, right? But we can't see it from a different perspective. All right, we get blinders on, and we're just not able to see it from a different angle. Right? And a lot of times confirmation bias goes into that because we believe that what we're doing is the correct way to be doing it. And I'm trying to think of an example right now off the top of my head, but I can't think of one. Type of fixation is what is called a mental set. Mental set is where you have solved a problem successfully in a certain way in the past, and because a certain thing has been successful in the past, right, then you believe that you keep using it even if it proves not to be successful. So if you when you were in college, if you're interested in girls and you picked up girls a certain way, right, and then you get out of college and you still try to use your college system for spitting game, right? Your college system for spitting game might not work in the real world, okay? And so you might not be as successful with it as you were in the past, but you might still just keep on keeping on with this unsuccessful system. Okay, so all right. What goes into us making good or bad decisions and judgments? I feel like this slide should be somewhere else. But all right, so heuristics oftentimes work. Okay, it's the way that I teach this class is basically based off a heuristic at this point, where it's all right, I know that basically my system is going to be successful most of the time. It's not always successful, but it's successful most of the time. But heuristics can cause us to also have blinders on. All right? Because they are based off of our expectations. They are top-down processing, right? Two ways that they can be problematic, and they can cause us to make poor decisions. A representativeness heuristic is when we make a judgment on something based off of the prototype that we have for that concept. Okay? How well does something mentally represent the idea of this thing in our head? Right? Stereotypes fit into that. Right? After 9/11, okay, there was a lot of anti-Arab, anti-Muslim violence, particularly at airports, right? Because people saw people of Arab descent, maybe they were wearing a hijab or whatnot, coming onto a plane, and they just automatically, oh, this represents a terrorist to me. And so, and the example that I use in class is, which one of these three people on here, like which one of these would be a workout instructor, which one would be a veteran, and which one would be a teacher, all right? Chances are you're going to go with, maybe this guy's a veteran, this girl's a workout instructor, this guy's a teacher because he kind of looks like a teacher when maybe you're wrong, all right? So, if you don't, that's Pete Buttigieg, and he was in the Marine Corps and served in Afghanistan. So that representativeness heuristic would cause us to make an incorrect decision. The other type of problematic heuristic is what is called an availability heuristic. So representativeness is how easily something fits into a mental image of something. Availability heuristics are how available is an example of something happening come to mind. All right? If something comes to mind more easily, then we assume that it is more common. So for instance, anytime teenagers start some dumb new trend, like the example I always use is the Tide Pod thing from a couple years ago. That was like all over Facebook, all over the news. These teenagers are subsisting only on a diet of washing detergent and whatnot. And so people, because it was all over the news, it came to mind more easily, and so people thought that it was way more common than it actually was. In reality, probably none of you know anybody who actually ate a Tide Pod.
I think someone in your class.
Someone in your class did know somebody, yeah. And so, climate change is, people who deny climate change because it snowed the other day, all right? That is an example of availability heuristic. It's also stupid, right? But it's an availability heuristic. There's another example of what do you think? What do you think that is more common? Words that have the letter K as the first letter, or words that have the letter K as the third letter? And people always answer words that have the letter K as the third letter because they're easier to think of. They're easier. They come to mind more easily. Actually, there are a lot more words that have the letter K as the first letter, but they just don't come to mind as easily.
I can't even think of one.
Yeah,
It starts with K.
I'm trying to think of one that's in the third letter.
Maybe I got that backwards, but yeah. But I think, the lottery machine when they make the noise.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could. The lottery in general is an example of an availability heuristic because people, you hear about people winning the lottery, and so you think it's a lot more common than it actually is. Okay, shark attacks in the summer are another one. Really, the news plays a big role in this. All right, overconfidence gets in the way of our decision making. As we've talked about a lot, humans are way too overconfident, especially people who are not smart. Okay, the Dunning-Kruger effect. People of low cognitive ability vastly overestimate how smart they are. And just because you're confident, people have started to mistake confidence and opinions as facts and as truth, which is not true. But I could say we might be in a post-truth society. So, belief perseverance. Belief perseverance is when we have a belief about something, all right, and it is proven incorrect. But a lot of times what happens is when we are proven wrong about something, we actually end up doubling down on it. All right, when we are proven wrong about something, rather than admitting that we are wrong, all right, to save our ego, we go deeper and deeper on it. So an example there would be QAnon and QAnon believers and the people who believe that Donald Trump is going to, they keep saying he's going to wait until this date. He's going to take back over on this date. And then it doesn't happen. And they're like, oh, but just wait. They're playing 43D chess right now, and he's coming back on this date. All right, and that doesn't happen. And so.
Arkansas. No, Arkansas. The third letter. A-R. Yeah. Wait, is it Arkansas or Arkansas? It's Arkansas.
Yeah.
It's Arkansas.
I'm thinking of the joke. Okay, never mind.
Okay. And then the way that something is framed, right? The way that we present something vastly influences how we feel about it. I know that I used to do a thing where I would just give a survey, and it would be like, I would ask 3 classes, what do you think contributes more to pollution, like traffic or industrialization? And then I'd ask 3 other classes, what do you think contributes more to pollution, industrialization, or traffic? And just simply having whichever one came first, the classes would overwhelmingly choose that one. So just simply the order of words in a survey question. Yes, frame, exactly, Sukir. Good job. Yeah, framing. We talked about it last class with Elizabeth Loftus and the false memories, with how fast were the cars going when they smashed or bumped into one another.
Would that be since the way cars presented, would that be changing the words that they use or the situation and how they present it?
Sure. Yeah. And framing is just how anything is presented.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's the last slide. All right. So, any questions there about problem solving? Yeah. If anybody has an example in mind and you want to make sure that it's right or whatnot, please ask.
Can you discuss things someone says?
No. Okay. All right. So now, moving on to how language, all of this unit is cognition, so it's all thinking. How does language influence thought? Language is any way that we communicate. It can be spoken, it can be written, it can be hand gestures. You see Anthony Bourdain right here. He's communicating to you. All right, so different parts of language, different parts of speech. And all right, so breaking it down, the smallest unit of sound in a word is what is called a phoneme. Okay, think phone, you hear sounds over the phone. Okay, so these are different than syllables. They're different than letters because these are letters combined to make certain sounds. Every language has different phonemes. So just think about how different languages sound different. That is because of the phonetics. If you learned how to spell phonetically, like if you did hooked on phonics, all right, then that was learning the different phonemes. Like in chug, ch, ka, all right, 3 different sounds, but it's only 2 separate syllables. Okay. What's interesting about phonemes is we are born with the ability to pronounce any phoneme of any language. We are set up, or we are a blank slate when it comes to language. We can pronounce any phoneme. But as you start to learn your household language, you start to lose that ability, which is why trying to learn another language at an older age, like if you're learning Spanish and you're learning how to try to trill your R's, trilling your R's might be hard for some people. Or like the guttural German sound, or like the umlauts, all of those are different phonemes. Morphemes are the smallest unit in a word that carries meaning. So these are the root word, or a prefix, or a suffix. So like the word teacher has 2 morphemes in it. The word teach, and then ER, which means to do. Yep. Oh yeah, yep, adding ED onto something, making it past tense is a morpheme. Adding an S onto something to make it plural is a morpheme. All right? And then grammar overall is just the rules of a language. How do we set it up? How do we derive meaning from it? The ways that we are able to communicate and understand each other. Can things be both morphemes and phonemes? Well, yes. It's like they're two totally different things. Phonemes are the smallest unit of sound that don't necessarily have meaning. Morphemes are bigger, so phonemes go into morphemes. Like morphemes are like words, are parts of the word that we understand to have meaning. Phonemes are just the sounds. So semantics is how do we derive meaning from language. So it could like morphemes, the morphemes in our language. Morphemes in our language are part of the semantics of our language. Does that make sense? So, what does it mean? Prefixes, suffixes, what does it mean to have ED on there? All right, but then also like the ability for us as people who speak English to understand the sentence, they're going over there to get their food. Okay? Everybody in here understood that sentence, but somebody who's just learning English would be like, what the hell was that? Like it was 3 of the same words in the sentence. Okay? Or like he got a bat and hit the bat. Like most of us understand what that, but other people would not understand that. English semantics are very, very challenging. Our English does not really make a whole lot of sense. Syntax then is just the order. Syntax is what we generally think of as grammar, right? But grammar is the broad term. Syntax is the order in which we put words in sentences. Like the difference in where in Spanish we put an adjective versus in English you put an adjective. In German, if you have a second verb in a sentence, it goes at the end of the sentence. All right, language development. Okay.
And finally, from us here on
the. These are pretty straightforward. You can just look over those. These are, just so we know, language development is maturational, meaning it happens in the same order for everyone. Okay, everybody starts babbling before they start with one word, and everybody says one word before they start with two words. But it's in the same order for everyone, but the time frame might be different. All right, language development, two different theories. Okay, B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner says that we learn language through social learning theory, which is essentially just imitation. Okay, we learn through watching somebody speak, getting some sort of reward or punishment for what they're saying, and then a child learns, oh, if I say this, then I will get something good out of it. So they are imitating while also using operant conditioning. Right? Nurture theory. Both theories of how we learn language are correct, right? But Skinner's theory probably explains more later language development, like how we learn new words and phrases and whatnot as we get older. Think about like if you cuss, when you started cussing. Okay, you probably started cussing because you heard people older than you doing it, and you thought, damn, that makes them look cool. Okay, and then you started doing it too. Oh. All right, and then, so Skinner is nurture, right? Then there's a guy named Noam Chomsky who says, it can't necessarily be imitation because we learn language too fast. Like, we go from saying one word at age 1 to speaking in full sentences by about 26 or 27 months. Okay, language is learned almost completely within about a year and a half, which is crazy fast. So Chomsky's theory is what is called the theory of inborn universal grammar. It's nativist, which means it says that language is native to people. They actually think that we gave up some other abilities. They think that we actually gave up our short-term memory capacity so that we could have language. Like we didn't consciously do it. But his theory on this, he says that essentially in our brain has what is called a language acquisition device, right, which is basically we are set up to learn language. It is inborn. Evidence for this is there's a critical period for it. We saw Jeannie's the most famous example of this when she was found at the age of 13. She had never really learned language. They tried to teach it to her. She was never really able to learn language. After about the age of 5, our ability to learn language declines significantly. Okay, and then once you've learned a first language, the second language is easier at an earlier age. The more languages you know, the easier it is to learn languages. The other evidence for this that I actually don't think I went over in class is what is called overgeneralization. Right? And it essentially is showing that we're not always imitating, especially at a young age, because kids will learn a rule of language like that ed makes a word past tense, and they will apply it to all scenarios with that. If we were imitating, then we wouldn't do that. They wouldn't say, I goed. They would say, I went. right? Because that's what that's what adults would say, right? But it's showing that, well, they're not necessarily imitating. They are learning that this is a rule, and then they apply it to everything. They overgeneralize the rule. All right. All right, and then finally, how does language influence thinking? All right, the idea of what is called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, that initially was language determines how we think. It's too extreme. Right? They say that your language this is how you are going to think because of your language. How we think about this now is what is called linguistic influence or linguistic relativity, which is language doesn't entirely determine how we think, but it influences our thought process. For instance, the way that we think about time and talk about time. In Mandarin, they talk about time as being vertical. Okay, meaning a height of time. In English, we talk about time as being horizontal, a length of time. And so when we think about time passing, in English, we think about it as like a straight line going out. In Mandarin, they think of it as something that is going up. All right? I highly doubt they would ask you to distinguish between the two, especially because linguistic influence is considered to be more correct now. We don't need to worry about that. All right, so any questions about that? Okay, intelligence. Something that nobody really agrees on, right? Intelligence is a whole bunch of things: ability to learn from experience, solve problems, and adapt to new situations. So it's learning, memory, all these different things. I think what you would be most likely to be asked about in terms of intelligence are the different theories of it. There are 4, 3. All right, the first theory from the I don't know when this was, 1930s maybe, 1940s, is and make sure you know the names associated with these theories. First one is Charles Spearman's theory of general intelligence, or what he called G. Basically, what this theory says is that people that are smart, that smart is smart and dumb is dumb. So the evidence for this is what they would do is they would give intelligence tests that scored what are called specific intelligences. So, well, this is a generalized example, but we could say like math, English, those things, all right, or S. All right, and what they found is that generally when people scored high in one specific intelligence, they scored high in other specific intelligence as well. And so that idea, like all of those combined, using factor analysis, which is looking at correlations between questions. Does this question does how somebody answers this question predict how they're going to answer another question? By using factor analysis, they would find that generally, sometimes there was that overall G factor, which we could kind of equate with like with IQ, sort of. So G, general intelligence, is probably too specific. There is some truth to this, especially in like academic stuff, and that's kind of what it's focused on, because the idea of intelligence back then was very People that are smart are good in school. We know that now to not necessarily be the case. So around the same time, there's another psychologist named Howard Gardner.
Mr. Stitt, please come to the front office.
That says no. A, intelligence is a lot of different things. And B, we can be good at one thing and not be good at other things. But he split this up into, whereas Spearman is looking more at like analytical intelligence or logical, he looks at a whole bunch of different factors. And what he basically says is that there are 8 different intelligences. I've seen these come up on FRQs before. Linguistic intelligence is like being good at writing, speaking, all of those things. Logical mathematical is sort of book smarts, being good at logical things and math, obviously. Okay. Spatial intelligence is understanding like how to manipulate space. So like people that are artists, architects, athletes, all these things would have high spatial intelligence. Musical, obviously having good rhythm. Body kinesthetic, having good body control. So like athletes would have high body kinesthetic intelligence. Intrapersonal, right, which would be being good with other people. Interpersonal is having a high emotional intelligence about yourself, like understanding yourself. And then 8 is naturalistic, which is like having a high intelligence in like things with nature. So like Bear Grylls would have high naturalistic intelligence. The criticism of this one is that it's probably too broad. And it also contributed to the false idea of learning, of different learning styles. Okay, that whole thing of like, how do you learn best is bull. Okay, there's really no scientific evidence that backs it up. Evidence for this, for multiple intelligences, is prodigies, but then more importantly, what is called savant syndrome, which is where people who generally have very low cognitive ability, but excel in one area. So if anybody's ever seen Rain Man, okay, he's autistic, all right, but he's very good at counting. We watched the video of the guy who had extremely low intelligence, but could play the piano really well. The guy, Stephen Wiltshire, I think is his name, who can draw like a picture, draw like an entire city from memory after only seeing it once. Okay, so these people generally have low IQ, but excel in one area. All right, the theory of intelligence that is considered to be the most accurate now is Robert Sternberg's triarchic theory, which kind of takes Gardner and makes it a little bit less specific. Like it makes the categories a little bit more broad. It takes 8 categories and narrows it down to 3. Those 8 categories, you can remember it as CAP, like your thinking cap. Analytical intelligence is book smarts. This would fall like with Gardner, this would be like logical mathematical and linguistic. Creative intelligence is the ability to think outside of the box and the ability to use like divergent thinking to come up with novel ideas. Everybody probably knows somebody who is not very book smart, but is a very good artist or a very good musician or something like that. And then practical is just everyday knowledge, right? Do you know how to, do the laundry? Do you know how to use tools? Are you street smart? Okay, are you not very good in school, but you set up a really good drug empire? Like you're a really good drug dealer, okay, but not very good in school. Okay, everybody knows somebody who's like that, and everybody probably knows somebody who is very, very book smart, but couldn't find their way out of a paper bag. My cousin has autism, but he's an excellent artist. Is that multiple intelligences? Yes, Landon, that would fall into savant syndrome. All right. And then emotional intelligence is exactly what it sounds like. This would include things like, and there's an argument of is this actually a really type of intelligence? But this is knowing you're being a bit self-aware and being good with others. They found that most CEOs and whatnot have high emotional intelligence. A lot of times people with high intrapersonal intelligence, understanding other people, are also really good at manipulating other people. All right, intelligence tests. 2 types of intelligence tests. Aptitude test is something that would predict how well you can learn something new or how well you are going to do in something. So the SAT and the ACT are aptitude tests. They predict how well you are going to do, or they're supposed to predict how well you're going to do in college. There's a moderate correlation. They predict relatively well how well you'll do your freshman year, but after that, not quite so much. And then achievement tests are tests on things that you have already learned. This is for the most part what we do in school. On May 11th, you'll be taking an achievement test, the AP psychology exam, showing what you have learned. Let's see. I doubt you'd be asked about mental age. Well, so IQ tests. The original IQ test, what's called the Stanford-Binet. With IQ is intelligence quotient. The way that they determined this was they give them a test to see what is their mental age, meaning at what age are they thinking, versus what is their chronological age. Okay, these all format differently when I combine all these PowerPoints. Mental age divided by chronological age times 100. Okay, so this is how they determined. What they used this for initially was to determine where kids should be placed in school. To figure out, all right, if they're a 12-year-old, are they thinking on the same level as a 12-year-old or not? Stanford-Binet, not used anymore. It was also used for a lot of bad purposes, like eugenics, trying to identify people of low cognitive ability and take away their ability to have children. The IQ test that is used now is what is called the Wechsler. It is still out of the equation they use is different. I don't really know how, but the equation they use is different, but the scale is the same. Average IQ is 100. There are 3 types of the Wechsler. The WAIS is the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. The WISC is the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children. And the WPPSI is the preschool, pre and primary scale for intelligence. If you've ever had to be assessed for learning disability or anything like that, you likely took the WPPSI or the WISC. Okay, all right, how do we construct intelligence tests? Maybe the most boring part of this class. Standardization is when, first off, for a test to be standardized, what that means is that everybody is being given the exact same thing, and everybody is being given, is having the exact same procedures for the administration of the test. So what they do with it, what they do to standardize is they give the test to a pre-test, they do a pre-test to a group, and then they compare scores to the other group that's testing to the pre-tested group. They tell us that the AP exam is standardized, but it is not. They actually standardize the test after the fact. Okay, but is it consistent? Is administration consistent? Are the procedures all the same? Are they all from a standard bank of questions? And a lot of times, if they give it on like a test, if they give you a, who the heck is this? They give you they say some questions may not be scored. You're part of the pre-testing group there. They're looking to see if information is standard for whatever they're testing. All right, and then for it to be standardized, what they generally want for a standardized test is that 4 scores to fall on a normal curve. Okay? They want to make sure that, and that is what happens like after the fact, after a test, they will standardize it to make sure they fall on a normal curve. They do that with the AP exam so that the majority, here might be the 5s, here might be the 4s, and then you're going to hear the 3s, the 2s, and then the 1s. The vast majority of people are going to get a 3 on it. And so this will probably be the last thing that we will go over. So this is very important, guys. Okay, and we're going to try to give you an FRQ before the AP exam that has this on there so you can get used to it. All right, but how do we read what a normal curve? All right, the normal curve is an algorithm. And what they could ask you to do, again, I have seen this in the past few years. They could give you a normal curve, or they could give you standard deviations or whatnot, and have you label a normal curve. And then they could ask you what percentages of scores would fall into this range. The normal curve, the breakdown of the normal curve, so these percentages here are preset. They stay the same for every single normal curve, no matter what it is they are measuring. And what these percentages mean is these are the percentage of scores that on a standardized test will fall within a score range. Now, the easiest way that they would do this is by giving you IQ. So they may tell you, all right, label a normal curve for IQ out to 3 standard deviations. Average IQ is 100. So you draw a normal curve, and then you put 100 right in the middle. A standard deviation is a number, and it's different for any set of scores. A standard deviation tells us what percentage of scores fall, or what is the range, what is basically the average range that scores fall from the mean. So I'll give an example for this. The average on the test that I gave today was a 75. Okay, so if it was standardized, and it kind of is, because it's an AP exam, I would put 75 right there. But there was a wide range. The highest score was a 99, and the lowest score was a 5%. All right, so the standard deviation of the scores is really big. Like the standard deviation, the average that scores different from the mean was like 25 or something like that, which is like way too high. But it's skewed because there's somebody who got 5 on it, which is amazing. So if they were to ask you to label a normal curve and they asked you to do it for IQ, you would put a 100 right there, and then this is the only one you need to know only standard deviation you need to know off the top of your head. Any other ones, they would give it to you, right? And then standard deviation for IQ is 15. What that means is, on average, scores differ from the average IQ by 15 points. If they wanted it 3 standard deviations from the mean, you would go 3 standard deviations above. So you would go 100 plus 15, which would be 115. That's 1 standard deviation. Plus 15 above that, which is 2. So that'd be 130. And then plus 15 above that, which is 145. And then go 3 below the mean. So 85, 70, and 55. You see, we're either just adding the 15 or subtracting the 15. These percentages right here tell us what percentage of scores are going to fall within a certain range. And you need to know, you can either remember 34, 14, 2, and then 0.0, 0.1, or you can remember it's like 99.7, 95, and I'm blanking on what the other one is. 68, right? It doesn't add up to 100 because of these things that fall outside of 3 standard deviations are called what? Outliers. Yeah. So what this tells you, so if they were to ask you what percentage of scores fall between 70 and 100, all you have to do is just add, so that's 2 standard deviations below the mean. You would just add 34 plus 14, okay, which would be 48. So 48% of scores would fall 2 standard deviations below the mean, and so on and so forth. Does anybody have any questions about that? All right, we'll fly through the other 2. All right. IQ tests need to be re-standardized every couple of years because we are getting smarter, apparently. So not in the U.S. Actually, that's true, not in the U.S. Average IQ in the United States has gone down. But this is called the Flynn effect. The idea that IQ is steadily rising. Every 15, 20 years or so it rises. A lot of different factors that go into it. Better education, better health care, better diet, all these different things. Okay. All right, last 2 things real quick. Reliability. Is a test reliable? Meaning, does it produce consistent results? If there are multiple forms of the test, if I have two forms of a test, and one group the average is an 87, and one group the average is a 62, that's not reliable. I'll use personality tests for an example for this. All right, the Myers-Briggs, or the MBTI, or it's called 16 personalities online as well. The Myers-Briggs has there's what's called test retest. If you guys need to go or anything, feel free. Test retest reliability. The Myers-Briggs has a 50% test retest reliability. What that means is if you take it today and you get INTP, and then you take it again in 3 weeks, there's a 50% chance that you will get a different personality type once you take it in 3 weeks. The tests in this class are pretty reliable. Okay, people who do well, people generally score, sometimes to their own chagrin. All right, they generally score around the same score each time.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, finally, validity. All right, so is the test measuring what it is supposed to measure? Is the test valid? Is it legit? Two types of validity. Content validity. Is the content measuring what it's supposed to? If I give you an AP Psych test, but there's a question about the Battle of Antietam on it, that's not measuring what it's supposed to. So this would be more content validity is, well, I guess it'd be both. Predictive validity, is it accurately predicting what it's supposed to be predicting? If I gave you, like for instance, if I gave you, I think pretests are stupid, but if I gave you an AP Psych pretest before the class started, chances are everybody in here would bomb it. That would not be predictive, though, of how everybody would do, because most of the content in this class you've never learned before, and so you have no basis for it. But in like Math 3, they give you a pretest to see what you remember from Math 2. That might be more valid. Okay. All right. Okay, guys. It is 3 o'clock, and so I will let you all